I'm here to actually talk about the work that we're doing locally, but I think as someone who's part of the environmental justice and climate justice movement, there are a few things that I want to say before I begin. For the brother from St. Louis, is he here in the audience? Do I see you? I just want to say that the work, two of the biggest things to addressing the issue of climate change in this country, I always say that the biggest obstacle to addressing climate change is privilege. And I also say that the path to building resilience and addressing justice is local. It is the hardest thing to do. It's much easier to sit in your silos and talk about new economies and talk about just transitions and come up with ideas about how we address some complicated issues than address the issue of privilege. People just don't want to give it up. And when we were organizing for the People's Climate March, and I was part of the leadership that was responsible for doing that, we started out with the Jiménez Principles for Democratic Organizing. We thought it was important to set a framework, a roadmap to how we were going to redefine what the face of the climate movement looked like. And it was a struggle. It was a struggle to make sure that young people of color were at the front line. People did not want that. They felt entitled. Their issue was the most important issue. And so even before we talk about taking on corporations, we need to figure out how to build just relationships with each other and do that work. So I have to just sort of briefly tell you what the Jiménez Principles are about, because I hope you look them up. I hope you own them. I hope they become part of your fiber. It's about inclusivity, not being tokens. Bottom-up organizing, letting people speak for themselves. And in the previous panel, you heard a speaker who respectfully talked about the climate justice movement and another one who told our narrative. That was really problematic for me. The fact that not only our culture is appropriated, but our messaging is appropriated, our story is appropriated. We speak for ourselves. The demographics are changing in this country. They're changing all over the world. And the bottom line is that frontline communities, the most impacted by climate change, the ones who have not been contributing to it are the ones that are going to be taken out. And so we have to drive those solutions locally in the same way that our people who came before us drove the civil rights movement. We have to own it, we have to lead it. So even when you're thinking about recommendations and things that should be happening in our communities, we do not want to be the passive recipients of somebody else's good intentions. We have to work with each other in a way that is very different, is very complicated, and it is not our responsibility to teach other people to do that. So that work has to get done. We have to be able to be committed to self-transformation. And so I invite you to do that, to be part of that process, that complicated, messy process of self-exploration and trying to figure out whether you speak for us, whether you supplant us by putting urban farms in our community that are not led by the people in those communities, or have funding for institutions that are not led by people of color, or whether you are facilitating a process, engaging and working to complement the work and working in a way that's respectful, that addresses a crisis in a way that requires not just leadership, but a different kind of human being. And so I have to talk about those things because everything else is very academic and is very easy, but the relationships are the hard part. And we're seeing that. Just yesterday, I went to a park that our organization was responsible for making happen together with a bunch of other people. Our organization is intergenerational. We believe that leadership is shared across generations, that learning happens across generations. It's an organization that has doubled the amount of open space, stopped the siting of a power plant, expanded medians, brought back buses, done in our community things with few resources. We call ourselves the little organization that could. With few resources, has done amazing things. And I sat there in that park that we fought for 15 years to get for our community in Sunset Park, and watched as the gentrifiers strolled through. got into my office and saw how developers in our community are using our successes, our ability to reclaim these spaces, our ability to do things to serve those communities that have been the reluctant hosts to all of the environmental burdens in our community, that suffer from public health disparities, asthma, upper respiratory disease, the whole 9 yards, and deserve to have open space and deserve to have environmental amenities, that at the moment that we succeed, and at the moment that we put our limited resources to make those things happen, they get taken away from us, as if we don't deserve to have those things, and we get pushed out. So these are some of the complicated things that we need to talk about when we're talking about space and reclaiming these spaces. Our organization founded a Climate Justice and Community Resiliency Center in response to Sandy. People in the community came to us and said, we want to do more than change the light bulb. And we said, okay, we got this. We put together a list of climate adaptation methodologies that are affordable, accessible, and can be done on the ground. We started a block-to-block organizing effort, and we are building a climate justice corps of people in the community who are educated on resiliency and also adaptation. We're looking at getting people literally off the grid, creating local cooperatives where people can together build an anaerobic digester. We're doing some pretty cool things, and we're doing it for the people who have been impacted, who have been living there for a really long time. Some previous speakers said that, they talked about our traditions. Yeah, our traditions. There's nothing more sustainable than a poor person. Poor people have always had to repurpose, recycle, and reuse because necessity makes you do that. And we do come from places where we know how to grow things and build things, and to be in this country, to be American, means to be addicted to consumption culture. And so what we want folks to do is to reclaim those traditions and to redefine what being an American is. That we're going to do that those of us who are the descendants of colonization and slavery, those of us who are that are going to be the majority in the country in 2042. And so we have to play a major role in redefining not just the relationships, but how the work is done and what that economy looks like. It's really important, and I know I could feel the energy in the room, right? I know that there's a little level of uncomfort with this conversation, but this is where change happens. In our communities where everybody's a little bit of this and a little bit of that, people come with traditions that basically educate us, and we have to listen with all of our senses, right? People work together in a way that really, it's interesting how people can hijack the room or take all the oxygen. So when you're in a meeting, and you think that because you have a particular high level of education and you understand things, you might not have something to learn from somebody else, you may be missing a really important opportunity. Most of the recommendations that come out of my organization come straight from the community. What we do is we facilitate the emergence, the development, the operationalization. I don't know if I made that word up. My bilingualism sometimes doesn't help me. I make words up. But we operationalize the ideas that the community has, and they drive them, they own them. We bring together a variety of stakeholders where you basically have industry partners working with people in the community, because those are places where people are working. And we have certain challenges, like we've got now on our industrial waterfront a business that is talking about green jobs and really bringing trinkets to community-based organizations, when what they're talking about is the usual economic structure with a green patina on it, and not addressing issues like climate change and climate adaptation and the things that are needed locally and regionally, union jobs, those kinds of things. So we in our communities on a grassroots level have to work not only on what happens on the block, but we also have to work citywide, statewide, and nationally. We're part of a movement that shares resources and technical expertise, so that on a local level we have access to all of the knowledge that we need to share with our community, so that our community can drive that local agenda. This work is happening not just in Brooklyn, New York, and Sunset Park. It's happening in the South Bronx. It's happening in El Salvador, in Brazil. There is this assumption sometimes that the United States has all the answers. And the truth is that the Global South isn't just in Latin America and Africa. It's right here. It's in Brownsville. It's in East New York. It's in Detroit. It's in Richmond. It's in LA. It's right here. And those challenges, people who are the legacy of historical trauma, are now about to become the majority of the country. And so the decisions that we make about place, about siting, about where facilities are placed, for a community that historically has had the worst housing, the worst employment, the worst health conditions, and is particularly susceptible to disease and is going to be affected by climate change, becomes a very different decision-making model. And so all of those things, I know that a sister talked about mental health earlier in the last panel. That was her last question. When she raised that, I thought about epigenetics, and I thought about the fact that growing up, one generation after the other being exposed to extreme stress because of poverty, because of oppression, because of racism, creates a certain kind of person. And that person is now faced with climate change. And so the issues are a lot more complex than people realize, but the opportunities to create something transformational are unbelievable. And to think that an organization like ours, which is so small, can do so many big things with so little resources, that happens because people step up, people take ownership, and people run the thing. Our organization has young people on our board of directors, on our staff. We've got young people who started with us when they were 10 years old. We've sent 3 young people to the South Pole on scientific expeditions, and 1 to the North Pole. And these are your young people of color from around the block. We think that our young people are not at risk, that they're at potential, because we were them once when somebody tried to put us in a box, right? So it's a way of really reframing how you think of community, how you think of place, and how you think of potential, that you should not have deficit-based expectations when you're dealing with communities of color, that you should not be the person who leads or parachutes in and makes the decisions for these communities, that you respect local knowledge, that you participate in a way that really shows how you build mutuality and solidarity, and that in engaging in that process, we will collectively engage in serious transformation. I'm Puerto Rican, and what that means is I always say that when everybody mixes in the future, everybody's going to look Puerto Rican. People may not think that's a compliment, but we like to think that it is. But what that means is that we have this tremendous capacity for embracing and celebrating difference, not wanting something to be homogenous. We embrace and celebrate difference. And unless we can do that in a way that's respectful and meaningful and challenges the conditioning that we have had historically, unless we stop in our behavior, even those of you who think you're on the left, mirroring the behavior of corporate structures in our process, unless you can do that, we will be in serious trouble. But if you can do that, we're gonna be all right. Gracias.